So, we've somewhat fallen into the niche of gender and how it pertains to anime. Currently, we've been really into the Apothecary Diaries. In fact, it's our favourite anime of the season.
Except maybe Shangri-La Frontier.
No!
The show is brilliant. From its characters to its mystery, the anime excels at creating a rich world for the politics and drama, all in the backdrop of a stunningly fleshed out ancient Chinese royal palace. It should be getting loads of attention, right? Well, at least on our small side of the internet, it's not being talked about at all. People might be skipping over it, and it's due to one small word that was attached to the show.
But before that, let's talk about the show itself. The Apothecary Diaries is an anime set in ancient China, and stars MaoMao, the eccentric daughter of the Red Light District's local apothecary. She is well versed in medicine and takes a masochistic pleasure in testing poisons on herself. She is a delight to watch on screen, and watching her try to traverse the inner palace politics with all its rules, kinda rules actually. At its core, it's a detective and medical anime. MaoMao uses her apothecary skills to help solve problems in the inner palace, despite the attention it brings to her. She just can't turn a blind eye to situations where she can help someone, or that pique her interest. Our other main character is Jinshi, a eunuch who holds a high position in the palace. He recognizes MaoMao's hidden talents and puts her to work solving the mysteries hidden within the royal walls, from ghostly sightings to health and nutrition. The plot and themes of this show are incredibly feminine. The first episode involves the cost of beauty, as well as romance and social politics. These are themes that regularly turn up in not seinen stories, but josei ones. This brings us nicely onto...
Seinen is a category of anime and manga. It has a female counterpart, josei. We made a long video on the differences between the four demographics, and I could still probably have a few debates over certain shows and how they fit into this dictonomy. Quadoctonomy? Look, taxonomy is just a game mortal men play with. It's not based in nature or the foundations of the universe. But in the case of the Apothecary Diaries, its demographic is seinen because it's being published in monthly Big Gangan, a seinen publication by Square Enix. Someone at some point went, I bet this will do well in this publication for these people. Now it is permanently marked with age and gender tags. We discuss every aspect of the things we love day to day, but this discussion really started back in July, and we got into a small bit of drama with a big shoujosei Twitter account, all over the Apothecary Diaries. We saw a tweet saying that they wouldn't be covering the show because it was a seinen.
But I had read the manga, and I thought it was something josei fans would adore. But it turns out that's a controversial opinion. After some back and forth and a lot of confusion, no conclusion was reached. But it did stick in our minds. No hate to anyone, obviously, but it did get us talking. Why does the Apothecary Diaries feel so much like a josei? I'm a huge fan of josei. The cool collected MaoMao who don't take no shit, and pretty boy Jinshi really do feel like characters designed for women. And me? But I don't pretend my tastes are particularly masculine. Yet nobody seems to be talking about it. So, like this person said on Twitter, why aren't we uplifting the show?
Present day. Present time.
Let's start with the titular character, MaoMao.
That's not what titular means. The titular character is the character whose name is in the title, like Naruto in Naruto, or Help in Help.
Well, she is the apothecary, so technically...
I looked into it, and it turns out an apothecary is the pharmacist, not the pharmacy, so it is the person. They refuse to be incorrectly represented here. No more joke for you. The show is set in ancient China, specifically the Ming Dynasty. A really fun setting that rarely gets to be about women. It centers around the daily life, politics, and mysteries of the emperor's concubines, with our protagonist slap bang in the center of it all. First up, our main girl MaoMao. As we've mentioned in other videos, the main character can be an indicator of what demographic a show is aimed at. Not always, but if you look at it along with other factors, it can help you build up an idea of who the intended audience was. MaoMao is a young girl of 17 who was kidnapped and sold to work as a maid in the Emperor's palace. Now she has to serve for 2 years to pay off her debt. Trapped in this dangerous game of court intrigue is actually where she thrives. She's a little amoral and a lot curious. the ideal candidate for a detective in the twisted maze of social standings and etiquette that is the inner palace. Her appearance is deliberately plain, as having grown up in the city's pleasure district, she's learned to keep herself a little unappealing to avoid the attention of the people around her. Especially men, the first of many themes that feels oh so targeted towards women. I mean, of course it's an anime, so the actual difference is she has a few freckles and a slightly less curated hairstyle. There's an attempt to make her less pretty, but a lot of it's more in the narrative, with certain plot lines revolving around the discovery of her fake freckles or being forced to wear makeup, which causes people to comment on how pretty she is. MaoMao hiding her true beauty is very in line with her character, but it's also a trope in media directed towards women. She's plain on the outside, but is secretly actually really pretty. Think Ugly Betty. Do you remember Ugly Betty? Do I remember Ugly Betty? Her main interest is also incredibly feminine, poisons and their effect on the human body. This mostly takes the form of her using her own flesh as a test subject, but she is a very knowledgeable medicine woman and can cure you just as easily as she could kill you. She uses her powers, mostly for good, in helping out the other inhabitants of the palace, although not always completely willingly. Sometimes she needs a little push from.
Our main male character is Jinshi, a male eunuch high up in the inner palace. He is depicted as truly beautiful in a very shoujo-esque bishy style. He is beloved by all the ladies-in-waiting who serve the concubines, all except MaoMao, who finds him incredibly annoying and demanding. He often has to resort to bribery to get her to do his bidding. Their relationship very much falls into that trope where he's enamored with her for being the only person who doesn't immediately fall for him. It's a very sibling-like relationship, where they both take pleasure in teasing each other, often to the ire of their higher-ups. This dynamic is the comedy that helps balance the murder and disease of the rest of the show. It's fun seeing two people who've been somewhat forced to be together warm up to one another over the course of the series. Jinshi is especially interesting as a eunuch because, despite his lack of sexual organs, he has a lot of sex appeal. This may seem odd for a show where positing is aimed at women, but it makes him feel incredibly safe to be around. Be it his nature or the lack of balls, he is very much not focused on the physical pleasures of life. For a lot of women, this can make a man feel like they cannot hurt them, similar to the classic gay best friend. In the removal of sexuality, a comfortable relationship can occur with no risk. There are some negative stereotypes adjacent to this though, with a few characters remarking on his status as a eunuch. MaoMao even questions if she should call him sir because of it, which is probably par for the course in terms of ancient Chinese standards of gender, but still, oof, low blow. Not that it'll hurt that bad. Jinshi's sex appeal is very much in line with the ways shoujo and josei depict their male love interests. Let me just put Jinshi here, and then let's look at some examples next to him. Oh, I see. The rest of the characters in the Apothecary Diaries only prove to elevate our point here. We have our duo. She is described as handsome and all of the maids swoon over her. This reminds me of the female prince trope, seen in shows like Monthly Girls Nozaki-kun with characters like Yu Kashima. The trope basically consists of a girl who's so handsome and cool, the rest of the girls swoon over her and call her prince. This is very often a shoujo trope. Another character would be Gao Shen, the serious assistant to the playful Jinshi. He is, first off, best boy, but he is also a serious, kind, and responsible older man. You don't have to think that hard to work out why someone might be into him. He kinda reminds me of Takashi Morinozuka from Ouran High School Host Club. This game's actually really fun. Who should we look at next? How about Gyokyo, the holder of the title Precious Consort, and one of the most powerful consorts in the show. She is kind, but powerful. She is attractive, but by no means over-sexualized. She kinda reminds me of Isabella Yamamoto from Paradise Kiss, a kind motherly figure who watches over the younger main characters throughout the story. While I'm on the topic of MILFs, for a future video I need names. Specifically, names of badass older women, like Sir Integra from Hellsing and Balalaika from Black Lagoon. Comment right now. Do it right now, just scroll down while I'm talking and just type in a name, I know you've got it in you. But that's enough of that. Let's move on to where the josei-ness of the show really becomes evident.
Where we really get into the proof this show is a josei, not a seinen, is the themes. From the very first episode, we're dealing with issues specifically of women's health: babies, childbirth, and makeup. As much as men can be interested in these things, the people in charge of making anime tend not to think they will be. You aren't really going to see these subjects turn up so much in male-orientated shows. Similarly, if it's for a younger audience, it won't be so heavy on the child-rearing part, because most teenagers aren't mothers or that fussed about the whole baby thing. So that rules out shoujo too. But the Apothecary Diaries isn't an overtly grim show, besides a few corpses and extreme poisonings, and the general melancholic atmosphere, and the main characters kidnapped and sold into indentured servitude. Okay, now I think back on it, it's actually pretty heavy on the macabre. It's just mostly textual. MaoMao is incredibly accepting of her situation, so we rarely see her stressed or distraught by the world she lives in. Again, very much within her character. The show has a lot of childbirth and childcare in it, but it's actually core to the setting. Unlike most media set in ancient China, this show doesn't center around men and their many wars. It's about the women who support them. Many monarchs throughout history have had concubines, but ancient China took things a step further. The emperor's concubines were all but locked in the innermost walls of the palace. Or the inner palace, as I'm going to call it. This is where our story takes place. A cage for the purposes of furthering a dynasty. The only men allowed inside are the emperor and eunuchs. This was to make sure all children's side inside the palace walls were definitely the emperor's, maintaining family bloodlines and the like. So that's our setting. A walled garden where women are taken to have children or to look after the women having children, and men are neutered to preserve dynasties. Another theme is somewhat more gender neutral, the idea of death and dying. The anime and MaoMao often reflect on their time in this world and how they want to live. Being around death will often make you contemplate on life after all. Near deaths over petty jealousy or accidental infanticide speak to an audience that could be in these positions to cause such a tragedy. Although men and women are both indicated to be behind these incidents, it's actually very often woman-on-woman violence. Or woman-on-child in the case of Lishu, who's bullied by her ladies-in-waiting. They manipulate her and feed her food she dislikes because they see her as childish, for the very reasonable reason that she is 14 years old. But we even find out as the show goes on that her picky eating and aloof personality are due to her upbringing. She's picky with food due to having several near-death experiences from allergies, which are only acknowledged as a condition by MaoMao. Through Lishu, we also discover honey as a potential cause of death, because as a child she nearly died from being fed some. This is a real thing, by the way. Babies lack the immune system to combat the botulism bacteria that can be present in honey, and it can kill them. As it's often women in these positions of care, they are often the ones who need to be aware of these risks, or might exploit them to cause harm. The specific type of bullying Lishu is a victim of is also very feminine. They often guide her wrong, so she makes a fool of herself in public, which then feeds a reliance on them because outsiders are dangerous and will harm or mock her for her poor social skills. This keeps her reliant on them, and as she was the previous emperor's favourite, secures their position of safety as ladies-in-waiting. Now, if you're savvy, you may have noticed that the fact Lishu is 14 and the previous emperor's favourite concubine really starts painting a very uncomfortable image. In fact, this is a key point of a twist in her introduction. As we're introduced to Lishu, we're also introduced to Aduo, who's an older woman in her 30s or so. One of them has recently become the mother-in-law of the other, as they were a consort of the old emperor and birthed him a child. Now she remains in the court, as the current emperor chose to just keep her around. The reveal here, spoilers, is that it's the frighteningly younger consort who is the mother-in-law, having given birth half a decade earlier as a 9-year-old. However, as the emperor is not a toddler, we can assume she's not his mother. This exploitation and abuse of a child is uncomfortable, but not so lingered on in the plot, because to the audience it should be obviously amoral, but to the characters it's just something that could have happened to any of them, much like being captured and forced into servitude. Subtleties like this are often not so present in more masculine shows, but are loved by women who enjoy nuance and socio-political issues, especially those that affect how women are seen and used in society. Women prefer things to be subtle, thoughtful, and implied. Men less so. But again, these are just generalizations to prove this show was not made with a masculine demographic in mind. Looking at trends and comparing them to other pieces of media is the best way to see who a show will appeal to, regardless of what demographic it is being attached to. That isn't just demographic, but also genre. Although in this case, the Apothecary Diaries seems in the right place there. The argument over what's horror or psychological thriller is always ongoing, or what's a comedy versus a different genre with just comedy elements, or whatever genres Netflix invents just to put 5 shows next to each other. Our thesis here is that the Apothecary Diaries is for women, and the outcome we hope is that this video can help swing the discussion around, and get more people watching a genuinely good show, especially those who may have dismissed it purely because of one little word that's barely attached to it.
Sex within the show is actually quite interesting in its presentation. The Apothecary Diaries is really sex positive. I think this comes partly from the fact that MaoMao was raised in the red light district alongside sex workers. If you know anything about this type of ancient Chinese courtesan system, The higher up you are, the less sex you need to have. Generally, we see the higher ups, but no doubt this building is full of low-rank sex workers. People who are indebted to the owner and have to work to pay it back. MaoMao is happy to use her knowledge to help out the concubines, and they are happy to use it, and have sex in general. The prospect of having sex with the emperor is given little attention. It's just a fact of life for these women, and a fact they don't mind. It's not seen as a negative at any point. In fact, it's often a better situation to how others might treat them. MaoMao lives in the nicer part of the red light district, where the brothels are well run and have a higher class of clients, but she's very aware that just a few streets away are sex workers who are much less protected and have to undergo much worse treatment. It's a very realistic depiction of sex, as being a natural course of life with positives and negatives. MaoMao uses her connections with the brothel to bribe a higher up in the army, and the courtesans trade sex for a safer life. But a John who gets a bit too aggressive is still a danger who needs to be dealt with, and the safety of sex in the inner palace can be lost to a younger or son-bearing rival.
Male-aimed anime tend to be faster paced, or at least have moments of high intensity in the forms of battles and whatnot. Shows for older audiences tend to have periods of calm reflection. So in this overlap, if it was a seinen, we'd generally expect to see some moments of high intensity action alongside contemplation of events or emotions. But we don't really get that. The moments of high intensity are more revelations of the episode's mystery, or an inciting event for whatever illness or poisoning is happening. But these still feel very gentle. The show's world is miserable, but it doesn't wallow in it, and it's very neutral if not a little optimistic about everything going on. Not to say seinen can't be optimistic, but in general the show doesn't appeal to seinen fans the same way it would to josei fans. And I have proof of this. Of the 33 reviews on my anime list, 2 of them do not recommend the show, and for both of them it is because of some perceived betrayal. Be that through the story not having enough conflict, or what conflict there is being silly and solved easily. They completely overlook the political intrigue and soft power at play, and only focus on the idea of being the most logical in any situation. We can even have a look at these two people's Mao profiles to see what they're into. Both of them list their gender as male, so that's a point in our direction. But if we look at their favourite anime, it's a lot of shonen and seinen titles. So these are very much men who like shows aimed at men, and neither of them liked the Apothecary Diaries, even though you'd think as a seinen it would be more up their alley. And these are only 2 people. These are people who are upset enough to review it. We have a good frame of reference for what the most extreme negative views on the Apothecary Diaries are. We can even analyse things a little more. There are only 33 reviews, despite this being ranked 35th on Mao at the time of writing. This show is up there with the final season of Attack on Titan, which has over 300 reviews, and Vinland Saga Season 2, which has over 200 reviews. Of course, both of these have longer running fandoms behind them, but the current ranked number 1 is Frieren, which has 142 reviews. 0.032% of members reviewed Frieren versus 0.015% for the Apothecary Diaries. That's a long string of numbers, but to sum it up, people who like the Apothecary Diaries are speaking about it about half as much as the next highest ranked show of the season. People definitely like this show, but why aren't I seeing people fangirl over what a little gremlin MaoMao is, or gushing about Jinshi? I've seen so much fan art of Frieren, or is it just that it's losing out and isn't the show of the season? And hot take, but I actually like the Apothecary Diaries more than Frieren. I'm not the type to avoid shows that are depressing, but I felt very little desire to watch Frieren after the first episode. As interesting as it was, I just didn't feel pulled in. With the Apothecary Diaries, I was hooked immediately, and look forward to the new episodes every week. Maybe I'm just not in the right headspace to be that depressed at the moment.
Don't worry, I read the manga, I'll get her to watch it eventually.
What about Yashike? That's generally a seinen genre too, I hear you yell at your screen. Well, that's an easy one to explain away too. The Apothecary Diaries is too miserable for Yashike, and too hopeful for regular seinen. But how does this all get decided anyway? A lot of anime are adapted from manga, and a lot of manga are adapted from light novels. But the Apothecary Diaries goes one step further by having its light novel be adapted from a novel itself that was adapted from a web novel after getting picked up by an official publisher. That's a lot of steps. That's basically the full potential life cycle of an idea in the anime world. But I thought it'd be fun to trace back through each of these variations in medium to see if we can see any changes in the demographic. This might explain how it ended up as a seinen. The web novel was published on the site Jousetsukani Naru, which means Let's Be Novelists in English. It's a self-publishing site with an emphasis on original content. kinda like Wattpad. The site was established in 2004 and has birthed a lot of popular anime, like Campfire Cooking in Another World, I Want to Eat Your Pancreas, and Log Horizon. The website gloats that over 250 novels have either been published as physical novels or adapted into manga and anime. The site has 21 genres listed, and none of them are gender specific, but they do distinguish between the real world and isekai for the category of romance. The Apothecary Diaries is still in publication on the site, and the author Natsu Hyuga has 12 works in total, with several others being adapted into manga. The genre is listed as reasoning brackets literature, which another part of the website I use translated to inference, and from what I can tell, it means these are detective novels. This very much ties into how we've already described the Apothecary Diaries. I couldn't find any other series in the genre that had adaptations to try and work out what was up with it, so let's just stick to it being a mystery detective-y genre. So at current, and having looked around the website as much as I could with my slightly above zero understanding of Japanese combined with some dubious auto-translation, I'm very comfortable in saying that at this point in its life cycle, the Apothecary Diaries is genderless. So onto it becoming a light novel. A year after it started publishing as a web novel, it was picked up by a publisher called Shufu no Tomo, who published a single volume of it as a novel, not a light novel. This novel has a front cover. That's what books do. This novel has an illustrated front cover with our first look at MaoMao and Jinshi. And while Jinshi looks surprisingly similar to his anime counterpart, MaoMao has a very different vibe. It was 2 years after this that it was released as a light novel. The difference between a novel and a light novel is that a light novel tends to be shorter and smaller, with several volumes coming out each year, and often have a more anime-inspired art style for the cover, as well as having insert illustrations. I can't find an exact etymology for why they're called light novels, only that it uses English loanwords to create a new term. If I had to give a guess, maybe it's because of their reputation of being pulpy and cheap, which meant they were printed on a lighter weight of paper, similar to Shonen Jump tankobons. But also it could have been because they were often smaller than a novel, make them easier to read on the train on your way to school or work. It's crazy how often when trying to research these videos, I end up trapped in a cycle of things referencing other things, almost verbatim, never having a source besides one guy just saying it somewhere, and then people just repeat that forever. They live on castles of sand, and someday they will crumble and leave us drowning. Anyway, Shufu no Tomo is a real weird publisher. I initially thought I had the wrong website when I saw their landing page, because it looks like something from a lifestyle or women's magazine. Which is fair, because they actually also publish those, alongside some several hundred volumes of light novel. A lot of these even seem to be incredibly male-focused, like Ideal Pimp Life and Harem in the Labyrinth in Another World. And yet, that very same landing page states the website is woman-aimed. They even have a bunch of incredibly feminine web magazines. So is this a case of a woman-orientated website and magazine publisher who also publishes horny men's light novels? The name even translates to housewife friends, which beyond the obvious gender connotations, also sounds like a series of cuckold porn films. But then I noticed the light novels were all in the same category, Hero Bunko, and they actually have a comics section, which is a series I'm 99% sure is boys love, as well as some much more feminine romances. So is this a female-orientated website and magazine publisher who also publish female-orientated comics, but also publish hundreds of horny men's light novels, and also the Apothecary Diaries? At this point, I'm not sure what any of this means. The words Hero Bunko translate roughly to Hero Library or Hero Collection, and considering the types of light novels here, I think we're dealing with the Dragon Quest type of hero, not the superhero. Or maybe they just think it sounds cool. By this point in the research, I'm somewhat losing my mind. I didn't think this would be easy, but I thought it would require a few less tens of hours of research. Maybe this is the point in its journey where the Apothecary Diaries was sorted into a male demographic. I can't say either way, but that's what I sense is happening. Definitely seems like Hero Bunko isn't entirely ecchi isekai. Son of the Immortal King here looks more like a horror or thriller show. Yup, that seems more like a supernatural thriller sort of thing. Hold on. Written by Natsu Hyuga, the same author of the Apothecary Diaries web novel? There's also a Restaurant in Another World, which isn't by Natsu Hyuga, but is listed as being seinen and published in Young Gangan, same as the Apothecary Diaries. It's all connected. So is this the source of my issues? Is Square Enix to blame for my days of suffering? Is this show actually seinen and this whole video has been for nothing? I refuse. I won't back down, and so I bring my final argument, the one thing that can prove my point. Maybe. I hope. The Square Enix manga publishing website Gangan has no shoujo or josei print magazines, and yet they're out here publishing manga like The Case Study of Vanitas, Pandora Hearts, Gakken Shoujo Noizaki-kun, and the ice guy and his cool female colleague. Now in the case of those last two, they are actually listed as shoujo and josei respectively, but it is also stated that they were published as standalone volumes. This either means that if it's a shoujo or josei, Square Enix only publishes them online and then in their own individual volumes, or they only publish male-orientated and manga that passes for male-orientated, aka manga with no overt romance, in their magazines because it will make them more money to be part of a lineup than require its own dedicated run. I end this rambling journey with the place the series currently lays. The anime. As with a lot of anime adapted from Gengan, it actually has no demographic listed for the anime itself for some reason. Hold on! There's been a sudden piece of breaking news on this topic. While double checking the difference between my anime list and Wikipedia, I noticed a detail I've somehow overlooked this whole time. The first novel, the one that was just a novel, not a light novel, was listed as female, and yet, when it was published as a light novel under the Hiro Bunko label, it switched to a male demographic. This is it. The exact moment I've been looking for, and it was under my nose the whole time. Is it just that when you become a light novel, you're automatically deemed as being for men? I entrusted my plucky sidekick and shoujo reader to go through the Wikipedia list of light novels and see which ones were for women, because I was out of my depth. A task that took him many hours of being distracted to eventually give me a list of 13 shoujo or josei light novels. I then double checked these 13 and discovered one was a visual novel series that has seemingly never had a light novel adaptation, only a manga. One had a shoujo manga, but the light novel was listed as male.
So, Wikipedia has it listed as shonen, but it was published in shoujo magazines. This stuff is so confusing, and it doesn't make any sense. But I feel like this just illustrates the point of the video.
We return you now to your regularly scheduled program.
One had no listed demographic anywhere, but was a series of female-orientated romance novels, and full yaoi, which is arguably female-aimed. Remember kids, Wikipedia is a good place to start, but always neurotically check your sources just in case. So even if we include these 5 exceptions, we are left with 11 female-orientated light novels. But you know, maybe it's just not that comprehensive a Wikipedia list. Oh wait, it lists 389 of the fuckers, which gives us 2.8% of this list as being for women. With this information and discovering a few more grey areas or changes from female to male, I'm confident in stating that when a novel or web novel gets adapted into a light novel, it's incredibly likely for it to suddenly have a male demographic attached, even if it was originally for women. But what does this actually mean for the Apothecary Diaries? What impact has this shift in demographic had on the anime adaptation and its audience reception?
Well, the only part of the show that feels distinctly counter to all of our points in this video is the opening. It's a great opening, but it feels very different to the rest of the anime. Not that anime openings are always great at setting the tone for the show. Looking at you, Solo Leveling. It starts by showing us a vast array of different potentially poisonous plants and flowers, slowly building up into the chorus where MaoMao emerges dressed in a gorgeous flowing dress, much like the flowers before. She dances for the camera, and it's all a little erotic, and not so in line with her character. The OP ends with the flowery MaoMao floating down and merging with the girl we all know and love. There are 2 interpretations of this OP. As MaoMao spends a lot of time hiding her beauty from the rest of the world to keep herself safe, the only time she can truly be herself is when she's in the company of her plants and poisons. They make her happy, basically. The other interpretation can coexist with the first. It just kind of feels like they made the female protagonist do a sexy dance in clothes she would never want to wear. Generally, the anime is exceptional at depicting the manga. Seriously, look at these panels next to the anime. But sometimes, panels like these get turned into extended scenes as the camera lingers on her lips. In my eyes, this is the anime directors trying to add in some sex appeal for the general male audience. I could be wrong though, I don't have any insight into the inner workings of Toho Animation, so take this section with a grain of salt. Breaking news! The new opening just came out while we were writing this. Who knows how long it's been out for you guys, but this video has taken a while to make. The new opening has none of the issues we just talked about, which is awesome. The new opening highlights all the great aspects of the show that we've been talking about without any of the weird attempts to appeal to a younger male audience. The elements we love shine through much brighter with this opening. Maybe they realize the boys just aren't watching, but the girls are very much paying attention. Seriously, you can't tell me they're appealing to men with all these dramatic shots of Jinshi that look like they should be on the cover of a trashy romance novel. So, what's the point of all this? Why do we keep talking about media directed at women and make videos talking about anime and other media being categorized differently than we think they should be? Well, so much of the media we consume is targeted towards men, and as a team of a woman and a man who's a huge fan of shoujo and cozy games, it's a shame. I've seen women avoid games and anime thinking it's just not for them, because it's either for kids or for guys. You know what, guys? Bros, if you're watching, if you're introducing women in your life to games with FIFA and anime with Black Clover, you're doing them a massive disservice. There's stuff out there for everyone, but the mainstream is so often for men. So, when we see a show like the Apothecary Diaries with designs like this, and themes that are so heavily aimed at women, but women aren't watching because of one single demographic label, we have to start shouting into the void. Because if you go on social media and talk about it and buy the official merch, we might get more shows like it. If we don't, if we keep silent because it doesn't fit our predetermined labels, then the message we're sending is don't make any more of this type of thing. And we want more of this kind of thing. We want more weird experimental things for a wider range of people with a wider range of tastes. That's it. That's the video. Go watch the Apothecary Diaries if it seems like something you would enjoy. And if you enjoyed this video, feel free to hit like and subscribe and tell us your thoughts down in the comments. We love reading and we love responding, so just let us know. We also have a Patreon, so if you feel like supporting us so we can one day quit our jobs and run this channel full time, we would be ever so grateful. Anyway, until next time, bye bye.